Welcome to the ASPPH Accreditation Dialogues. This is round 4. This webinar is the 6th of the webinars that ASPPH has sponsored over the last 18 months with our CEPH counselors, CEPH staff, and interested attendees from across the ASPPH membership, and we welcome you today. All of these webinars are archived on the ASPPH website with written transcripts of the Q&A for each session. You can access the handouts available that accompany the conversation we're going to have today in the right-hand side of your screen. We have the draft association-wide response. We have CEPH draft round 4 criteria, that's the narrative, CEPH draft data template, Excel sheets, and CEPH's degree classification key. As we have muted the lines to enable a clear presentation, participants may ask questions or make comments using the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We're going to be giving preference to ASPPH members. Go ahead and send in your questions now or at any time during this conversation. I'll go ahead and introduce our presenters today. Moderating the webinar is Dean Gary Raskob, who's also the Regents Professor at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center College of Public Health, and Dean Raskob is the chair of the ASPPH Board of Directors. With us today also is Dean David Goff of the Colorado School of Public Health, University of Colorado, Colorado State University, and University of Northern Colorado, and Dean Goff chairs our Accreditation and Credentialing Committee. Our CEPH counselors are represented today by 2 of our 4 member counselors. We have Dean Donna Peterson, also Senior Associate Vice President at USF Health, and Dean Peterson is at the University of South Florida College of Public Health. And also joining is Dean Iman Hakim of the University of Arizona Mellon Enid Zuckerman College of Public Health. And Dean Peterson, you're welcome to make a few remarks now.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Liz said, this has been quite a journey, and we have been engaged in a lot of dialogue over a number of years with ASPPH, our member schools and programs, and other people who are interested in the future of public health and how we educate professionals. CEPH has been actively working on the revisions to the criteria, and very, very grateful to everyone who has participated in this and who has sent comments. We are now in the last round, the 4th round of comments, and ASPPH, as they have been doing throughout this process, has compiled a draft response to the last round, and that's available, and we're hoping people are reading that and taking advantage of the opportunity to contribute and clearly being on the phone today, and we will have another one of these next week as one last opportunity for members and others to weigh in. So we do appreciate very, very much all of the active participation and the contributions that the field has made to this very important process, and we're very excited to wrap it up and move into the future. So thank you all for being here. Thanks, Liz.
All right, thank you, Donna. And with us also today is one of our CEPH representatives. We have Ms. Molly Mulvanity, who's Deputy Director at the Council on Education for Public Health. And her, Ms. Laura Racer King, is still on sabbatical. The Executive Director, Council on Education for Public Health, has been a very close part of this process as well. So, Gary, we will turn over the mic to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you all for joining today and for all of your outstanding work on this initiative. It's truly, truly appreciated and will be a major benefit to public health education and the accreditation initiative going forward. Before we begin, I think I would like to just take a few minutes to make some remarks, given it's just over 2 weeks yesterday that we suffered the tragic loss of our good friend and leader, Dr. Harrison Spencer. I'm still coming to the realization that he's no longer with us and continuing to process my own feelings every day as we progress through our grieving and evolution of that. I want to express my sincerest appreciation to all of those members and ASPPH staff who've been so supportive and wonderful in this process, and I would encourage all of us to continue talking with each other and supporting each other as we continue to evolve and pass through our grieving phases of this. I think a couple words about Harrison are in order as we go forward on this initiative, and I would just like to say I think that ASPPH does important work for the good of its members, its students, public health education and research, and society overall. Harrison Spencer knew that. He lived that. He led us as a servant leader every day in these efforts. I was so privileged to really get to know him very, very well over the last 4 years, particularly the last 2 years. We spoke almost every day on various things related to ASPPH, and I want to share with you, after our leadership retreat, we spoke and a number of times in depth and debriefing about that, and then email correspondence. And I think the most telling comment is the following, and I'm just quoting him directly. He said that ASPPH works best when its members are involved thoughtfully. And I think the initiative we're talking about today really underscores that. All of you have done an enormous amount of work on this to date, including our partners and stakeholders engaged with ASPPH. I know that while we'll have many, many ways to honor Harrison, and the board will be talking about those in the next couple of weeks, to me, one of the best ways that we can honor his contributions and legacy will be to continue this work that he was so passionate about, to do excellence in everything we do, and to make him very, very proud that his vision for ASPPH and things that he still wanted to accomplish are going to continue and be implemented. Each and every one of you is making a very important contribution in this respect, and in doing so, you honor the legacy of Harrison Spencer. I want to thank you all. I want to thank David for his leadership, and thank Liz for her outstanding leadership and effort, and thank all the many others who've made such important contributions to get where we are today, and look forward to an important, productive conversation about these criteria. Thank you, and I'll turn over to you, David.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for those comments. They mean so much to all of us who have been processing our own emotions and feelings over the past several weeks. So thank you for expressing your thoughts at this point. It's truly been a pleasure to work with all of you on this process of review and refinement and improvement in the criteria for accreditation for our schools and programs. And as Gary said, Harrison would want us to keep going and to put our effort into this and to make sure that our programs reflect outstanding programs that will educate the practitioners and scientists of the future to improve public health. So with that, Liz, would you please move to the next slide? Where are we in this process, you might ask? Well, we're near the end. We've been doing this for about 18 months, starting in about March of 2015. We're close to the end of the 4 rounds of review and response. In the previous 3 rounds, CEPH has, I think, done a very good job of responding to our comments. Excuse me. They've incorporated many of our suggestions. Some they've not, and that's to be expected. And when they have not incorporated our comments, they've responded why, and it's been a very thoughtful and constructive interchange that I think has brought us to a very good spot with respect to the criteria in draft 4. We've circulated a draft response to the 4th version of the criteria. You have that in the handouts today. Hopefully you also received it about a week ago. And that document is something that we want to make sure we get your comments on today, if you have comments, as well as any other last questions or comments you might have about the criteria. Once these criteria move forward to their final version, they'll be the document that really guides us in our programs and schools for the next 5+ years as we continue our efforts towards excellence in public health education and research. We'll have one more webinar next week. You're welcome to join that if you have further concerns that we don't get an opportunity to address today. Liz, why don't we go to the next slide? This slide just is an opportunity to remind us all of the different groups within ASPPH who have been reviewing and commenting on the criteria. So many of our members and our representatives, deans, associate deans, program directors, faculty, staff have been involved in reviewing these criteria from a multiplicity of different angles and perspectives. And I want to thank all the people who participated in these formal reviews, as well as all of you who have reviewed the criteria and provided individual comments. Next slide, please. This slide shows the organization of the criteria, and the highlighted sections, B, C, and D, are the sections that have received, I think, the most review during this final review of the criteria, particularly sections C and D, resources and curriculum. So that's where I think we'll focus our attention today, but if you have comments on any of the other sections, please feel free to raise them. Next slide, please. As always, you're encouraged to comment directly to CEPH. Let me just say, I hear some paper rattling in the background. If you're able to put your microphone on mute, that'd be useful. You're encouraged to comment directly to CEPH by emailing Molly or Laura. We'd also appreciate it if you do send a comment directly to CEPH that you copy us at ASPPH so that we're aware of your comment, and your comment can be considered by the larger group for whether it's something that would be endorsed as a comment by the larger group, thereby potentially increasing the likelihood of incorporation in the final document. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of how you submit questions, in the box on the right of your screen, you can type questions into the comment box. And let's see, next slide. We have a couple of questions that already came in, and Liz, I think you were going to read this to people. Would you be willing to do that?
Sure. It's very long, and I know you can see it on the screen, but for those of you who are calling in only by phone, you'll need to hear it. So this came in from a participant, and it's more of a comment, but it's a really good one. It says, we're a non-U.S. school that relies on medical school faculty for some of our Master of Science degree programs. I suspect other schools may have issues with counting these faculty, especially those with a little different context of 100% 12-month appointments. Here, each faculty member is evaluated annually on teaching and training activities, so our school provides the population scientist in medicine with an opportunity to be involved in teaching that meets their professional career needs. We have only one medicine faculty member we pay at a 40% level, and the rest are pro bono, with the teaching responsibility usually negotiated at hire and the exchange of activities considered a professional courtesy. As the med school has some students in our MPH programs, they see us as their population level training arm, and in return they pick up some teaching. As we have grown, there's much less reliance on faculty from medicine, but for a couple Master of Science programs, the overlaps seem appropriate based on content. My sense is that if this requirement stands, and we'll turn to the requirement in a second, the criteria, actually we'll return to our response in the criteria, side note for me, we would need to move to creating embedded certificates within other degrees to serve this community.
So I'd like to just put this in the context that this question is about how we define a primary instructional faculty member so that we can count faculty members within our schools and programs. And so I would like to draw attention to the response that's currently in our draft response on how to define primary instructional faculty. In the current draft of the CEPH criteria, there are two different ways of counting primary instructional faculty. One way that applies to schools of public health, and one way that describes how to count primary instructional faculty at public health programs. Within the review that's occurred during this round, there's been discussion of this all along, but it has really come to a head during this round. Some concerns that it would be preferable to define primary instructional faculty in such a way that they're defined the same for programs and schools if possible. And this has been raised by people who have been concerned about the different approaches to counting primary instructional faculty and the different ways in counting them for supporting degrees. If they're defined differently and counted differently, it poses different challenges, and especially for some of the programs that may be on their way to becoming schools. So in the current draft response, there is a comment that we think it would be preferable to define primary instructional faculty the same for programs and schools. And so it is indicated here under C resources that a primary instructional faculty member would be employed full-time as faculty members in the school or the university that houses the program, or the school that houses the program. And for the purposes of accreditation, faculty members will be considered employed full-time if they are employed at least at the 0.75 FTE effort within a school or university using 12-month contracts, which is the same level that's comparable to full-time within schools or universities using 9-month faculty contracts. So that's the first aspect of what it means, a definition to be a primary instructional faculty, employed by the school, college, university that houses the unit of accreditation at least 0.75 FTE based on a 12-month year. The second aspect is that the faculty member should be spending at least 0.5 FTE on activities associated with the school or program. That includes instruction, it includes research and service, if those research and service efforts affect the students and the school or program. And that's the second aspect of being a primary instructional faculty member. The third component is they have to be responsible, regular responsibility for instruction. And that's not just mentoring research students, but regular responsibility for instruction in the curriculum of the school or programs, public health degree programs. Okay, so this is a suggested revision to how we define primary instructional faculty that would apply to both schools and programs. I'll just summarize. Criteria, aspect number 1 of the definition, employed at least 0.75 FTE in the academic institution that houses the unit of accreditation, devoting at least 50% of an FTE to the activities of the school or program, teaching, research, and service. Number 3, regular responsibility for instruction in the curriculum of the public health program or school. Okay, I'm going to stop and ask if there are comments about that.
All right, well, this is Molly, and I'll dive right in. I want to thank David for that really excellent summary, because I did have an opportunity to look at ASPPH's draft comments ahead of time, and I was sort of still chewing over this recommendation, in anticipation of discussing this with the council, although I recognize this is still a draft of the comments at this time. I think I now have a much better appreciation and understanding of where this comment's coming from. I'm going to say, before I do this deep dive, that this is a really complicated, and sometimes it seems a little arcane area in terms of the very specific ways in which we dissect and discuss and analyze the faculty complement. We're really trying to do it in this draft, going back to the principles that we've talked about all along, the principles that are most relevant from our criteria revision to this criterion are the concepts of flexibility and quality. We're really trying to balance those two very carefully here. When we draw sort of a line in the sand and say, okay, this number of faculty is not going to be sufficient, that's sort of our way of holding out for the principle of quality. And then when we try to make some allowances that recognize the individual situations of any given school or program, that's our way of sort of recognizing flexibility. So we're sort of taking those two elements. Sometimes they appear to be in conflict, but we're trying to balance them overall. Okay, going back to David's very clean analysis of the comment that's been proposed for a revision. There were 3 parts to it, and part 3 is really identical to where we are now, so I'm going to leave that one aside. Part 1 is the part about 0.75 on a 12-month contract, being allowed to constitute full-time employment at a university. And I think the council can certainly discuss that, and that seems, something very reasonable for us to discuss, because we've always said full-time, and full-time means different things in different contexts. So I'm happy to discuss that first item. The second item, proposing identifying primary instructional faculty identically for schools and programs, I think that becomes particularly challenging in the second item of the proposed comment. Now, the reason I think that is because the idea of having a primary instructional faculty in a school defined as 0.50 or greater to the public health enterprise would actually be a fairly radical restructuring of the way we've traditionally defined the faculty in schools. The reason that we define programs in schools differently is because in a program there is not necessarily an entity to which the public health faculty are going to be fully appointed. In a school of public health, we're accrediting a unit, we're accrediting an entity, we're accrediting a place where people can and are indeed expected to have an appointment and a home, and that's kind of the idea, I think, philosophically, of how schools, in one sense, differ from programs, is that schools are a specific public health entity. So if we define schools and programs the same, what we open the door for is, so let's imagine a new school being formed. It is possible that that new school could be formed by sort of taking faculty from, let's say, an existing school of medicine or nursing, and giving them half-time appointments in this new school or program, in this new school of public health, and allowing those individuals to still maintain up to half of their time and effort with an orientation of medicine or nursing. That has not been the way that we have thought of establishing schools of public health. I would contend that it's actually a fairly radical departure from the way we've traditionally defined schools of public health, and I'm not sure that it's one that folks would necessarily be comfortable with and all of its implications. So I want to sort of challenge folks before we finalize these comments. Obviously, our council is going to discuss the comments, but I want to push back and have folks really think about the implications of what that would mean to sort of go forward with proposing Part 2. I do think that there is some difference in schools and programs just because of the way we accredit them. So that's sort of, I wanted to do that kind of deep dive and think about Part 2 as we discuss this comment. Now, stepping back a little bit and sort of looking at the broader picture, David also raised an important issue that some of the larger programs have said that they'd like to maybe be considered equivalent in a way that's more similar to schools. And I think we could have, there are ways in which we could allow programs to choose to use the higher stringency of the school criterion if they wish to. Because I think the idea is that programs have more flexibility than schools, but if a program wishes to hold itself to a more stringent standard with regard to appointments like the schools do, then that would be something we would certainly be open to discussing. But I think we need to be very careful about relaxing the standard too much at the school level just because of the traditional definitions that we've had. So that's sort of, again, a dive into the arcane issues. I'd like to step back now and go back to our original comment, which related to the MSc degrees and faculty from the medical school teaching. There are two things I'd like to emphasize about this comment without getting into the very deep specifics of it. One, this comment shows, is an illustration, I think, of the great variety of schools and programs that we work with. If you can imagine this multiplied by approximately 200, this is the universe that CEPH deals with. And I think this is a good way of illustrating how there are novel situations that come up with almost every school or program, and we are trying and endeavoring and working really hard to write some standards, some criteria that will accommodate all of those and fulfill our principles of balancing quality and flexibility. So this is a great example because I think this is probably an N of 1, this particular question, but we have a lot of N's of 1, and we want to make standards that are appropriate to the best we can for all of those N's of 1. And still sort of says who we are as a field and what our basics of quality and accreditation are. The second principle that I'd like to point to that is raised here is the idea that we are trying to incorporate greater flexibility in these standards. And we are trying to recognize that there is a great deal of interdisciplinary teaching going on and that is very much the wave of the future in public health, if it's not already present. So we're trying to figure out ways to recognize that there are appropriate faculty roles for individuals who are not necessarily appointed full-time in the school or affiliated full-time to the same department of the program. So I think this question points at that. And then finally, this question presents a new wrinkle because our analysis, we tend to be, you'll note in these criteria, mostly concerned in many cases with the MPH, the DRPH, and then bachelor's degrees in public health. And then sort of concerned, but a little bit less prescriptive with master's degrees in the academic disciplines of public health. So what this question is sort of asking us to think a little bit more carefully about those, that's what I would call sort of the second tier where we're a little less specific, which is those academic master's degrees in public health. And do we want to hold them to the same standards that we have developed for our MPH, DRPH, and bachelor's degrees in public health? And I think that's a legitimate question that we'll want to take up as we finalize these criteria. Very long response, but I don't know if any of our counselors or others on the line have anything to add.
I think you did that beautifully, Molly. And I think the point about the fact that a program is very different from a school, and which argues for perhaps not the exact same criteria because we're doing two different things is a very important point.
Liz, I don't know whether there's anyone on the call who is trying to comment on this particular discussion. Is there?
No follow-up yet on this point. There is another new question.
So why don't we move on then to the next question?
Okay, great. Thanks. That was excellent back and forth about that issue. And if anyone would like to follow up, go ahead and type it into the chat box on your screen. We did receive another question prior to the start of the webinar. It's actually a comment, and it's from someone who submitted suggested edits for in two areas. First, for the MPH foundational knowledge area. So you could look at that. It's number 12, and it's explain a One Health ecological perspective. And then the person submitted edits on the MPH competency list, number 19, perform effectively on interprofessional teams. And curious to see changes in these areas. If you looked at the ASPPH draft response, it does not include any edits to these two particular competencies. So I believe, Donna, you're going to speak to the intent for these two.
Sure. So I think on the first case, and remember we've gone through several rounds of this idea of what is the knowledge at the very level, what is foundational knowledge that every MPH student should have, and we've gone through a number of rounds of this, and the comments from ASPPH and its various members have been extremely helpful. And from those comments, this idea of we should be talking about a One Health concept came up, and we agreed that this is something that MPH graduates, DRPH graduates should understand this concept, even though the concept itself may and likely will evolve, and we might not call it that at some point in the future. The idea of this broad ecological perspective, the environment, animals, humans, all of that is just a concept that we believe students should understand. That came from the field. We agreed, and as you said, you've not suggested any edits to that. On the other one, I know people have expressed some concern that because when you get into a competency, then you have to you actually have to assess that a student possesses that particular competency, and then how can we assess that they can perform effectively on an interprofessional team. And again, I think we have to remember that this is all in the context of the educational experience. So it's not like we want someone in a full-time job and we observe them over many, many years of work. That's not what this is about. I think it's also important to recognize that every other health profession has signed on with great enthusiasm to this idea that we need, as educational institutions in the health professions, to be helping our students understand what it means to be part of interprofessional teams. We have to give them opportunities to understand what that means and what their role is in those teams and how those teams can function more effectively, more efficiently, and that we believe public health needs to be part of that conversation, part of that dialogue. Indeed, we are part of the interprofessional education collaborative. We've actually provided great support to that effort, and that we don't want to be the only health profession that doesn't require this in their accreditation. Everyone else requires this. So that's one reason this is here. The other issue is that there are many, many creative, innovative ways that this can be met, and I think even if you're not in a fully supported academic health environment on your campus, there are certainly clinical opportunities in every community where there is an MPH school or program, and there are certainly opportunities to create classroom exercises that would enable this, community-based learning exercises that would enable this, volunteer opportunities that would enable this. And we will be, CEPH and I believe ASPPH as well, as this criteria roll out and we learn from all the natural experiments that will take place, how people have done this. We will continue to inform the field and provide opportunities for people to learn ways to bring these competencies to life. So that's why those are still there.
Donna, this is David. I think that's very helpful. The other comment I might make about interprofessional teams is really based on a lot of discussions we've been having within my school, in which many of our faculty would really like to see our students interacting with other professions other than the healthcare professions in interprofessional experiences. And so I think when we think about the options that different schools might pursue and implement, especially at those schools and programs that are not on a academic health center campus, there are many other opportunities. We have, for example, a dual degree with the Master of Urban and Regional Planning, where some of our students are interacting with urban planners and architects around built design and community design, and those are really effective. There's other programs where people are interacting with social workers or lawyers or engineers, and so I think the opportunity for interprofessional education goes even beyond the idea of interacting with other healthcare professional students. The other comment I'd make on this one is that we are thinking about incorporating this concept into our applied learning experience at our school, and I'd be interested in knowing whether others are thinking about that as well. We still, at this point, use a kind of traditional practicum experience as the applied learning experience for our MPH students, and we are going to be surveying our current practicum students who are engaged in their practicum this summer to find out how many of them, what proportion of them have been interacting substantively in an interprofessional way with nurses or physicians or social workers or other professions during their applied learning experience. We're contemplating incorporating some of this into the applied learning experience as an aspect that gets beyond the kind of group educational experience that we also have on campus, in which medical students, nursing students, pharmacy students, dental students, and public health students are learning in an IPE kind of classroom setting to see whether we can incorporate some of the IPE or interprofessional experience into the applied learning experience. I don't know whether we'll end up there, but it's one of the things we're thinking about, and I just make these comments to really reinforce what you said about the multitude of different ways that programs and schools may choose to implement this competency.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more, David, and thank you so much. And you're right on it's broader than health professions, and I'm really, really glad you said that so clearly. But yes, I mean, these are the kinds of ideas that we all want to hear and learn from and grow as a collective body. And those are great examples of the kind of things that I was alluding to. So I think we will have opportunities going forward to continue to learn and grow. And I know there's some frustration out there. How does public health fit? And we're the last to be invited, and we don't know. But again, I think if we really work on this, we can really leap this ahead, which is going to be really super for our field. It'll be great.
All right, excellent. Now we're going to fresh questions from the question box, and there are a couple here. I'm going to bundle from the same person, a student, and here goes. Related to primary institutional faculty, I have a question about requirements for these teaching faculty. My experience in my MPH program so far has been that faculty are not capable instructors for the classes they are appointed to teach. While they may possess an MPH or PhD, they have been unable to convey the material or provide appropriate additional resources because often the topic they're teaching is not their specific area of focus. This seems to be unfortunate and unacceptable. So how does CEPH go about ensuring that this isn't the case? Wouldn't you say that most MPH instructors have not had or do not receive much, if any, instruction or teaching overall, or more specifically, teaching public health classes? And hold on one sec. There's a related question, and that is, as a student, I have also noticed that many of my instructors are not qualified not only to instruct but to evaluate student work. For example, in some cases I've not received feedback beyond cool, And in some cases, I've seen that others have proposed an intervention that was clearly unethical, yet this work was lauded openly in class. How does CEPH look to oversee and evaluate MPH instructors on this level?
Okay, wow. Some provocative questions. So the first thing I need to say, you know, as a staff member of CEPH, is that the role of accreditation in general, broadly, not just for CEPH, is not to second guess the individual hiring and task or class assignment decisions of an individual school or program. Our idea is to ensure that there are processes in place, that the program or school is has processes to evaluate the qualifications of faculty and is doing so, rather than to sort of micromanage who is teaching what class or what that individual's qualifications are. I would also say that I think our experience has been that there isn't necessarily a one-to-one correlation between the field that might be listed on someone's diploma and the area that that individual can teach. I think in our thinking about faculty qualifications, we've grown to think much more broadly. And our standard in our CEPH criteria on faculty qualifications, I think, reflects that, talking about the idea that we look at the totality of an individual's professional experience, certifications, education, research presentations over the years, to sort of, we encourage the school to look at the totality, the school or program to look at the totality of the individual's experience in determining qualifications. That a more holistic review can often be more successful. I think that the students who've sort of raised these provocative comments are pointing to some areas that I'd like to think that we're addressing a little more explicitly in our accreditation criteria, asking for a little bit more attention to evaluating faculty's instructional effectiveness and to supporting faculty's instructional effectiveness. I think you know, we've sort of tightened some of our standards around those areas. In the past, it hasn't been an inadvertent omission, but we have tended to single out research and service and just sort of take instruction almost for granted. And so we have made some efforts in our criteria set that are revised to sort of address some of these issues. I also think that our orientation in these criteria toward asking schools and programs to talk about specific assessment opportunities for the competencies that they've defined, it's a step further than what we've asked before, and it does require a little bit more attention to instructional just sort of the philosophy of instruction and to paying attention to instruction. So those are some ways I think that our criteria, as revised, are hopefully strengthening the area of instruction. But I don't know if any of our deans who are on the call, who are accustomed to dealing with student and faculty concerns, would like to add anything to these students' questions.
Well, this is David. I'll take a first crack at that, Molly, and then we can see where we go from there. You know, the first thing I would say to this student is that we hear you, and you know, there's a commitment to instructional effectiveness, and I would say I agree with Molly that CEPH has strengthened their focus on instructional effectiveness. Liz, if you could bring up the current draft criteria and go to section E3, line 1912, I would point the student and others who are rightfully concerned about instructional effectiveness to that part of the document that describes the way CEPH will be holding schools and programs accountable for assuring instructional effectiveness in the new criteria. I'd also add that the concerns that are being raised are not unique to public health schools and programs. These are concerns that I think are widely recognized by students, faculty, and administrative leadership at universities across the country in many, many fields. And there is much greater emphasis on instructional effectiveness and pedagogical technique currently than I would say there has been earlier, at least in my career. So I think it's good that we now have greater emphasis on instructional effectiveness. I think it is all of our hopes that this focus on instructional effectiveness will translate into an improved learning experience for our students. So I want to thank you for raising this issue and at least assure you as best I can that we're focused on it and we're hopeful that we'll improve in this area. Donna or Gary, I don't know whether you have additional comments from the perspective of a dean.
Well, again, it sort of links back to the earlier topic of how do we count the faculty and how do we determine who is a faculty, and this is the challenge. As we said, we want to allow schools and programs to be flexible and to be innovative, but we also have to assure quality. And if we don't have enough faculty to teach the content that's being offered by the school or the program, as the student alludes to, I gather we have faculty in this particular situation teaching outside of their particular area of strength, and so that's where this becomes an issue, that we want to make sure we have enough faculty to teach whatever it is a school or a program wants to teach and says it is offering to students. So that's part of how we have to balance and assess, and how schools and programs should be able to use this new criteria to both address this issue more deliberately, but also to make some choices about what is it we want to offer that we can offer very, very well, and what maybe do we not offer anymore because we can't offer it well.
Well said, Donna. I don't have anything to add to that. I agree.
Okay, Liz, perhaps the next question.
Okay, yes, we do have a few more in our last 13 minutes. And this one looks like it pertains to criterion D11. And the question is there an expectation of how the analysis and discovery requirement for non-MPH students will be operationalized? Will CEPH continue to expect the analysis and discovery course will be epidemiology focused as the requirement currently is? Or could the new proposed criteria be met through an applied method specific, for example, within a population health framework course that is not specifically epidemiology?
Yes, this is, again, a really specific question. As Liz said, it's related, it appears first in criterion D13. And basically, first of all, let's just be clear, this criterion that the question relates to is about, for most schools and programs, this would be about your MS degrees, so non-MPH degrees in public health fields, and MS in EPI, and MS in health services, whatever that would be. So currently, in our current criteria, there are basically two requirements that apply to those degrees. And the first is that they receive a broad introduction to public health. And the second is that they receive an instruction in the basic methods and tools of epidemiology. So those are the sort of two requirements. And what this questioner is getting at is how do those two requirements translate? How do we read that current criterion against the proposed future criterion? And so if you read the first part, the broad introduction to public health, well, we've got it translated in more specific detail there. Instead of making folks guess about what we mean by saying MS students should have a broad introduction to public health, we've indicated what we mean by that. And the questioner is also astute in pointing out that the second part is a little bit of a translation of our current requirement for epidemiology. So what the exact language that we say is that students also complete coursework and other experiences that substantively address scientific and analytic approaches to discovery and translation of public health knowledge in the context of a population health framework. That is not code for an epidemiology class. It is possible that you have an epidemiology class that could accomplish those aims, but that is not just a set of different words to mean we still expect to see an epidemiology class. However, there are a lot of words in that sentence for a reason, and that reason is that we don't just think anything goes. So a general methods, a research methods class that is shared between psychology students and education students and public health students would not meet that this standard. It's not just sort of a general toss a research methods class in there. It's very specific to population health methods and a public health context. So I think probably the simplest answer to the questioner is that yes, an appropriately constructed methods class certainly could serve instead and satisfy this requirement, whereas an epidemiology class is currently required.
So what I take it is that there's greater flexibility now than in the previous criteria, but still an expectation that this formal coursework would be of a public health orientation.
Exactly.
Liz, should we go to the next
Sure.
question?
Yes, so back to the question box here. And there is one that came in. I think this is an important one, and it's regarding the new criteria. Once the new criteria are announced, how do we know if a school makes a course change for spring 2017? Will there be an approval process for changes such as a substantive change form to CEPH?
Yeah, this is a really good question about implementation, and we've been saying all along, please be patient with us. We're going to try and be as clear about implementation as possible. I think one thing that has emerged is that we will want to communicate very clearly not only the timeline by which we expect to see compliance, but the timeline and specific expectations for letting us know how you're coming into compliance. So I think the questioner is right to raise an issue that submitting a substantive change for every incremental change that occurs on the way to revising a curriculum, if the school or program is revising the curriculum, that might be a little bit administratively burdensome, both for the school or program and for CEPH, processing all those substantive change notices. So I think when we adopt our implementation plan and communicate that to all of you, I think we will give you some sort of explicit understanding about what, in the interim, what needs to have a substantive change notice submitted and what does not. We will not be changing our approach, so this isn't going to be a carte blanche period where you don't have to submit substantive change notices. So adding a new concentration, adding a new joint degree, removing a concentration, those kinds of things, of course, will continue just as they do today. But in terms of the curricular changes that are going to be occurring, if folks need to make curricular changes to come into compliance, I think we will be able to make some statements about ways in which substantive change reporting can be rolled up into some of our required reporting that we're going to have about implementation of the new criteria.
Okay, thanks, Molly. And here is another question in the box. A slide was presented that lists the groups that are looking at these issues, but I saw no group for ethics. Or policy. Why is that? And I'd like to call out that we move the slides back. There is, we have a health policy and management forum, so policy was addressed by that group, and they actually had a number of comments in this round. And ethics came up, it's a cross-cutting issue. It has come up in a number of conversations across many of the groups you see here. And in the draft recommendations we have regarding the competencies, that issue, you'll see it there, that the way ethics has remained or has been enhanced was as a result of conversations around that very important issue. And I think we have time for another question in the box here. If a school identified competencies in addition to the CEPH required ones, will CEPH be looking for documentation on those competencies as well, or will they be expecting to see documentation only for those required to be in compliance?
Right. So this is a question about competencies on top of the prescribed competencies that are listed in D2 and D3. And the response is that all schools and programs are required to develop competencies on top of those that are listed in D2 and D3. And the way we frame that is they're required for each concentration, even if the school or program has one called generalist, that there's still a requirement that there are competencies on top of those that are listed in the criteria. So whether those competencies that the school or program shows were applicable only to one specific concentration, if it's multiple concentrations in question, or whether those were sort of competencies that were specific to the school or program's mission and applied to all of the students across degree programs, we would certainly still expect the school or program to A, be transparent about those competencies, listing them in appropriate ways and places to be accessible to stakeholders, and number two, be accountable for how those competencies are assessed. So, so absolutely, we would refer, we would expect to see some discussion of how the competencies are assessed. And I see that the questioner has sort of written in to clarify that that he or she is referring to common core competencies for the MPH, not concentration. So if your MPH program at your school or program builds on the 20 competencies that are here and said all MPH students in our school or program are going to have 25 core competencies, for example, and the 5 that we've added are specific to our school or program, then yes, we would need to see, we would need those added to the matrix and know what the assessment opportunities are. So the idea is that the school or program is responsible for competencies are a bit of a contract between the school or program and its stakeholders. And so if the school or program is going to have them, regardless of how many there are and regardless of whether they're optional or compelled, the school or program needs to be accountable for how they're assessing those.
Thank you, Molly. And we do have more questions in the box. However, with just the 3 minutes remaining, we are going to need to wrap up. So we are going to move on. However, be assured that we always take the time post-webinar to get answers to those questions, and we will make sure that they are posted for you to see. There we go. See the response. And so, David, I'll turn back the mic to you to wrap us up for today.
All right, thanks. Please move to the next slide. This is our timeline to get from here to the finish line. We're in the phase of review of the draft letter, which really the draft letter is basically that PDF that you have with the responses to the current draft criteria. There'll be a cover letter that goes along with that. But those are the responses. We encourage you to review that and to send comments to Liz or to post them in the online community. The Accreditation Committee is going to have another webinar next week on the 29th. Our responses are due back to CEPH no later than September 7th. So we would appreciate your comments by September 2nd so that we can incorporate everyone's comments into the final document that is due to CEPH. And you'll notice, I think, Labor Day is in the middle of all that. So I want to assure you that we're going to review the discussions that took place on the call today. We're also going to review the questions and respond to them that we weren't able to get to with the time we had today. Please continue sending your individual and institutional comments to ASPPH. Feel free to send those also to CEPH if you would like. And we'll be posting an archived version of this webinar on the website. Thank you all very much for your participation today. That we really are better together, which is our tagline for ASPPH, and I'll turn it back over to Liz and say thank you very much, Liz. Thank you, Molly, Donna, and Gary and Iman for being on the call today.
Okay, David, yeah, this has been a terrific conversation. We have an online community. It's a discussion chat mechanism to communicate and share thoughts ideas, concerns, questions about the accreditation, you can see here how to sign up. It's for ASPPH members only. And we want to make sure also that you know the details not only on this final accreditation webinar that's taking place on Monday, but a few more that are coming up. You can see them listed there and how to register. Click on that link. Coming attractions, we have our annual meeting, March 15th to the 17th in 2017 in Arlington, and our undergraduate summit as well, right before. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you very much, and hope you all have a terrific day.